Katie, you're a physical therapist. You work with people in pain. I'm a gym bro, and I have lots of pain all over my body. And I want to know, just give me the simple answer. How do I fix my pain in the gym?
I'll start it off hot. All right. Yeah, everybody wants that like very easy 3 bullet pointed list of exactly what to do as soon as they experience pain. I wish it was that easy. I wish it was always that simple. Um, where do we begin here? I
Wherever
think
you
the
want, Katie, wherever you
Yeah,
want.
there's so many avenues that this can go down. I think the first thing is just kind of the recognition of that question being impossible if you're looking for a simple answer. Like, there is so much variability in every single person and their pain experience that to try to summarize it in a way where I can guarantee that I'm going to bulletproof you could not be farther from what is actually physiologically and psychologically possible when it comes to pain. I kind of, as a word of caution to people, will just generally say, like, if you see something that says it's going to completely fix your pain or like give you these top 3 things to do, then you should probably seek information elsewhere to kind of get a different opinion.
Mhm.
I think the biggest thing is like with this type of question, first and foremost, I think when most people are experiencing pain, they immediately go to like the worst case scenario that something is wrong. The mantra that we say all of the time is not all pain equals harm. And I think being really clear and understanding the very rare instances when pain is actually like a medical emergency versus when it's just your body being a body and you being a human and you having a reaction to something that's going to be much more complex than a very quick answer. If you're not having red flag symptoms, which we would consider to be neurological symptoms of some sort, like shooting pain, sudden loss of strength, extreme loss of range of motion, if you didn't have a traumatic event or a mechanism of injury where you were like, this thing happened, and then I had pain, or I had a fall, or I got hit by something or something happened. In the absence of those 2 things, like trauma and specific red flags, pain is so much more of a collection of your experiences as a human, the things that are going into your training, and quite frankly, probably not going into your training, and a lot of other just like big picture umbrella things. So I think that's like the first thing is to kind of hopefully it's easier said than done to undo that thought of like every pain experience I have means something is terribly wrong. Ben, you train a lot. I train a lot. Do we ever train pain free? Do we ever have days where we feel like 100% all of the time, every single day? Absolutely not. I think that's an effort and futility. And I think probably a lot of people look to people in the industry who do have a lot of training experience, maybe with this like assumption that because we train hard and well and we have for a long time, that we're doing something different and something right. That means that like we're just never, ever, ever going to experience an issue. So I think that's a big part of it too, just like normalizing the experience. I think there's this big misconception that the absence of pain is what people may think makes them healthy. That's
Mm.
not it. There's so many other like parts of the puzzle. And if we create this expectation that like pain, the only goal with pain is to completely fix it, and if it's not completely fixed, then you are still broken, then we would never train. Like nobody would ever do anything again. So that's like the first thought that I have if you want to bounce off of that before we dive into like the million other ways that I can take this.
Yeah, that's so fantastic. And I don't just want to double click. I want to triple click on that. Okay. Like when you're trying to like press the button and you think just like clicking more, that's what I want to
Right.
do with this topic. So, um, the first like comparison that comes to mind for me is that of how this relates to like emotional regulation. Obviously, it's all overlapping, but just to briefly separate the concepts, like I used to think, for example, that if I was angry or sad or feeling any kind of, depressed type of way, that there was something fundamental that I kind of need. I need to go in there with a a sharp object and cut something out because whatever's in there must be sort of pathological in some sense.
Hmm.
And then you learn as you get older, you're like, oh, these are like signals that are maybe alerting me to something that I could pay closer attention to. Maybe I'm stressed at work, not because of the work itself, but because of this person who's making me feel this XYZ, whatever. And so the less that I have pathologized those types of negative emotions, which even calling them negative emotions, I think may be problematic for
Yeah.
some people. Just looking at them with sort of non-judgmental, sort of meditative type of lens, it's been so helpful because now all of a sudden we're like, oh, there's nothing that's inherently wrong with the system here. It's actually the opposite. It's actually the
Yes.
system is sending important feedback. So can you kind of talk a little bit just about why pain is actually could through some lens be considered a quote unquote good thing and not necessarily a bad thing?
I love that comparison. I think that's spot on. I think what I try really hard to do is humanize and normalize the pain experience for people because people think that it is pathological and that something is wrong with them,
Hmm.
and that their brain and their body is doing something wrong. And reframing that to understand, like I always kind of say it jokingly, but it's true. The brain's literal job is to keep you alive. So if
Hmm.
there's anything that it's sensing that would be some sort of threat to that, it's going to tell you. And that's a good thing. Like we want that to be the case. Pain, of course, it makes logical sense that your brain is going to make you pretty aware of something painful because of that association of pain to the brain and a really like quick heuristic without a lot of context. A very quick snapshot judgment, which the brain is good at to predict things and help you act quickly. That it makes sense that pain would be that like initial trigger of like, oh, something's wrong. But upon further review and using context and exploring things a little bit more, we see that it's maybe not always like as helpful for it to be that quick of a snapshot of a judgment. But I always tell people like the brain's job, it's a predictor. If we think of it that way, it kind of makes us understand a little bit more why a lot of these reactions to pain can be pretty cyclical, can be pretty chronic, can be things that people experience for a long time, because your brain really is working as a predictor to use past experiences to predict what a future experience will be like. This is an energy conserver. The brain has a lot of things to do, so if it can use these heuristics or shortcuts on the surface, that's helpful. But if we consider it that way, it does help to make us kind of understand, like, okay, I don't have a faulty nervous system like people talk about with pain. It's not that there's something wrong with you. It's just that maybe you haven't really explored all of the nuance to your experience and you're kind of aligning with that snap judgment because it's easy and it's quick and it's something that it's kind of served you in the past, like the an if this then this type logic. And as we know, there's just so much more to it than that. But it's not, I try to really encourage that it's not a negative experience to have some of the alarm bells or the pain experience telling you things. I consider it a data point as well. This is stuff that I feel like we'll probably get to in some way, but so much of people's pain when it comes to lifting, once trauma and red flags have been ruled out, it really has a lot more to do with like zooming out and looking at what does your program look like? What does it have? What does it not have? What is your volume and intensity looking like? Are you redlining every training session that you do? Or conversely, are you not doing enough? And then you just try to 1RM and your body was like, what the hell are you doing? Um, do you go really, really, really hard and get so exhausted that then you need to take months off and then you try to just ramp back up where you thought you were? Um, all of that stuff that we've all done before, like
Yeah,
we've
yeah, yeah.
absolutely all done that to ourselves. But if we start to dissect a little bit more of that, it becomes very evident that pain is pretty actionable because we now find maybe gaps or holes that we can address. And that's really empowering for people. And so pain is a data point instead of just this like end all be all, you're screwed, this is bad, we need to stop immediately.
Hmm. Yeah. Something that makes me super uncomfortable now is I would assume that you feel this way. Like whenever I see people espousing opinions as sort of disguised as facts, that I used to myself hold. So this kind of like, I think what we're maybe referring to more broadly is like this fix it culture.
Yeah.
Anything related to the fix it culture gives me like a jolt of like discomfort because I spent probably 3 or 4 years with that mentality, and
Yeah.
it was only after the fact that I really recognized how preoccupied all the time I was with even the smallest things. Like, just to give a couple of examples that I still am seeing all the time. Um, you know, even just something as broad as mobility, let's say, like the notion that, a client comes to a trainer and the trainer puts the client down on the table and, moves their body around, and this is the range you have. And oh, look, see, this is not where it should be. We need to get to that point, right? And lo and behold, the person continues to come back. Maybe they see the progress, right? Which is in quotations for people just listening. Maybe they don't, but ultimately the person maybe gets attached to this notion of like, I must get to this point that this person told me that I need to get to. And it seems that like that is almost now how so many people are getting introduced to these topics. It's like,
Yeah.
it's not just about people getting introduced to lifting. It's almost like they're more concerned generally with things like posture and range of motion and
Yeah.
mobility. And all of that there's this sort of undercurrent of, in all these different areas, I need to be a fixer.
Hmm.
So my question to you, because I don't even in retrospect really understand how I was able to move out of that. I think it was just a natural consequence of like just continuing to be super interested in these topics and to not be able to shut
Hmm.
my brain off. But most people aren't going to be like that. Most people aren't going to be, hyper obsessed with like learning more about these things. So like
Yeah.
for that person, how do we kind of unravel the fix it mentality, and what do you think in practice is a more sort of concrete, productive alternative to that?
Well, that's a great question. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think we all start that way for sure, especially coming from like a physical therapist lens. Like in school, we're literally taught to just find the dysfunction and give a list of limitations and dysfunctions that we found. And that's our aha moment of like, look, I'm a doctor. I figured it out. I'm going to fix you. And I think I agree with you that I don't even really quite know when the pivot happened for me either. But I think I've always been just more in the background of meathead and focused on like strength and conditioning principles. That's always been my bias. So I think it just took time for me to get away from what I was initially taught in PT school and kind of go back to the principles that brought me there in the first place, if that makes
Mhm,
sense.
mhm,
Um, yeah, I think a big thing, we're actually even really careful of our verbiage that we use on social media for Old Bull Athletics for our facility, where I think initially the message was like, we'll get you out of pain faster and we'll fix it and we'll do all these things. And now we don't even really talk about that. We talk so much more about improving qualities that are going to help people in the long term and using almost like the pain experience of somebody coming in as a window to then help create a healthier lifestyle for them.
mhm,
So I think that's the biggest shift that when I'm talking to a patient, I try to center on like, um, pain probably brought you in here, but what we're really well suited to do is make you so resilient and robust that you can handle anything mentally too. That's a big part of it. And create goals for your health and your healthy lifestyle that we're kind of starting today to continue to take you so where you can continue to do the things that you want to do.
mhm,
So that's kind of like the transition for sure. I think if people are looking for a more of a fix it approach, I think the argument that we were just talking about that like pain's going to do what pain's going to do. We cannot prevent pain. We cannot say that you're not going to walk out this door and like stub your toe. Like just like I can't prevent you from doing that. I can't prevent you from not having pain. But again, I can instill qualities and make sure your training program is really well rounded and give your body exposures to things that maybe it's not getting enough of, or dial back some things that maybe your program is highlighting more than it needs to, and utilize more of that like collaborative sense. I think it's also like just the reality of if you want to train for a long time, if you're chasing a fix it approach, you're going to be lifting so infrequently because you keep
mhm.
finding things wrong in quotations that you need to constantly fix instead of again just building into a program that makes sense logically from a framework of exercise science, from a framework of how does physiology actually change, not really with low level mobility things and this like magic degree number that somebody tells you you think you need to have. It's a lot more nuanced than that. I think it's a good thing though, because again, it makes it actionable. Like if you just feel doomed because your hip internal rotation is never going to be what your therapist tells you it needs to be, versus like, hey, we're going to find a way to load you in that position that doesn't feel very good right now in the best way that you can possibly tolerate. And I don't care if you don't have that number of internal rotation. So I think that's a big thing. To just like reframe that fixing isn't really the goal. Building resiliency and robustness so your body can handle what life throws at you, is probably a better goal.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm laughing so much because I mean, you're communicating something that like is super clear and concise and I think will be super well understood. And it's just something that I wish that I had heard, so long ago. It would have saved me so much time. But I'm thankful. I'm so
Yes.
thankful. No regrets. No regrets, none of it.
No, I
Um,
was just thinking of like a ridiculous example, just again, because I think people see maybe the where we're at now clinically, and they're like, well, how do I get to those thought processes? It's like, well, with a lot of stupid shit first.
mhm.
I remember I had somebody coming in who they had discomfort in a deadlift and with overhead pressing. This was probably 5 years ago. And they wanted to like learn better mobility for those positions, and like every session, we just went through like a laundry list of mobility drills for the lower and upper body. And then at the end of it, like I still never had them deadlift. And I was like that was the thing you came in for. And I was like, well, I guess that's it. We did all the mobility. Like it seems so silly and obvious now where it's like, if you have a problem with this thing, well, I have to test you on this thing and create a way for you to do it in a way that is less problematic. Like it's so
Mhm.
obvious now, instead of trying to, yeah, poke and prod and find all of the, again, in quotations, like the dysfunctions or the things that you lack. And so I can, say that I fixed you. But yeah, we all have those stories of we're like, what the hell was I doing with that
Yeah.
person?
Yeah. One of the people, I don't know if you have heard of him or know his name. His name is Tom Pervis, and he
Yep.
runs a company, RTS. I've learned a tremendous amount from Tom, especially in the physics-based realm. So credit to Tom for so much of this stuff. But when you meet someone who is so unbelievably good at their job, who is so unbelievably comfortable saying that they don't know what's going to happen, it's like I'd ask him a question about this, this patient that he had who got into this massive car crash, who literally like can't even walk on their own. Like, where do you start with that person? He's like, Ben, like, I don't really know, but like,
Yeah.
we're going to see how it goes. So, I
I
mean,
love that.
many people talk about like, getting comfortable with the unknown. And it's so cliche now, at least in like education spaces, getting comfortable with the unknown. What does that really even mean? I think I like to think about it more as just becoming I don't know, more confident in the whole process of experimentation because I don't know,
Hmm.
there's just like so much more fun to that too,
Yes.
which I'm sure you've experienced. Whereas like with the fix it model, you have like your clipboard out and it's like
Yeah.
it's so technical in a sense, but it's also
Yeah.
so not technical in a sense. And I think maybe some of it could come from just academia as a whole, where it's like you study for a test and you get your test back and it's either a check mark or it's an X.
Right.
There's no, which is necessary to some degree, but unfortunately, it's a whole kind of like principled mentality of I get
Yeah.
this right or I get this wrong. There's no gray area. Um, but anyway, I wanted to ask you one thing about something that was kind of in the mix there, and I'm sure that this conversation will kind of continue to weave in random directions
Hmm.
this way. With this sort of anti-fix-it approach, with this sort of I'm going to explore, I'm going to treat pain as not this bad thing, but as this sort of signal to pay attention to. We kind of arrive at a place of a little bit of chaos. Like we
Hmm.
arrive at a place where we don't have a clear map of the territory. Um, we have just maybe a kind of an understanding here or there of what I should do or how I should go about it. So I want to like maybe make it more concrete and let's talk
Yeah.
about like a specific example. It could be like a patient you've had recently or just any random example that you maybe see sort of on repeat, anything like that. Can you kind of take me through like an initial like what it looks like for someone to come in with pain and to sort of work through that process with that person with some specific examples of maybe exercises relative to the joint, to
Yeah.
the muscle, et cetera. So take it away.
For sure, for sure. Yeah. No, I think if we think just generally, like if somebody is coming in for pain and it's, having to do with their training, first and foremost is I'm ruling out red flags or trauma. Like I mentioned, I'm doing that no matter what, because once I get rid of that, I've talked about this a lot, but for me, a diagnosis starts to matter a lot less, because it's a lot more of just finding, like my goal day one is essentially like, I want to find all of the things that you can do in your training that don't trigger your symptoms and like give you the green light and the confidence and then like the okay to go and do them and to push them to get a good training stimulus. Then I also want to find the things that maybe aren't as comfortable or that you have fear of or that are painful and see if we can find some sort of entry point so we can start challenging your tissues physiologically to give them exposure, but then also your brain to know that like, hey, this isn't always going to be terrible. We kind of have to do both. Like what that's what finding an entry point and doing very gradual progressions. It's for our physiology to catch up to be okay with it, but it's also for our psychology to catch up and be okay with it. So that's like my main goal initially. It's also, I'm a pattern person, so I like to look for patterns. The biggest thing that helped me in understanding maybe what movements could be contributing to somebody's discomfort or what program issue could be contributing to their discomfort, has a lot to do with the patterns that I see based on the questions that I ask. So a
Mm.
lot of it is going to find the gaps of like, what does your program have versus what does it not have right now? Is it checking the boxes in terms of appropriate volumes and intensities and movement patterns and planes of motion and types of contraction and all of that stuff? Is it balanced? Is it all over the place? Do you have a program? Do you not? Like we have plenty of people who, when I ask that question, they're like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Okay, cool. We're gonna unpack that a little
Yeah,
bit."
what's a
Um,
program? Yeah.
yeah, and then also like even more specifically, looking at patterns of, does this bother you when you're eccentrically loaded? Does this bother you when you're concentrically producing force out of the bottom of a position? Does this bother you when you land? Does it bother you when you take off? Like there's so many things that can help us kind of fine tune and understand a bit more of what that person's dealing with. Um, an example that I've often given before because it's just so clear. I had a young guy come in, like 30, brand new to strength training, and got really excited by it. And first of all, you hear that and you're like, hell yeah, like this is awesome.
Yeah, yeah,
Somebody's
yeah.
very excited, like just starting lifting. He's very tall, very lanky, and like this is all brand new to him. So he wasn't following a program. He went to the gym and he knew he's like, I'm going to do 2 upper days and 2 lower days. I'm like, awesome. He has knee pain on both sides, like very, very sensitive, tender front of the knee pain. He went to a doctor. They said, stop lifting, ice and rest. He did that for 8 months. Nothing
Great.
changed. So strange that nothing changed. And when I asked him, even before I hadn't even like done any sort of assessment in quotations, I'm just talking to him. I asked him like, could you walk me through what your lower body training looks like? And he's like, sure, of course. So he tells me he does he's very lanky, so he does super high bar squats. He has like the most perfect upright knee forward squat you've ever seen, almost like he is like basically doing a sissy squat.
Mm.
So high bar squats, he's doing leg extension machines, walking lunges, and he wants to get a pistol squat, so he's practicing them every day. And very clearly and quickly, it tells me right away, like, there's nothing wrong with your knees. There's nothing wrong with you. Like, you don't have an injury. You have just completely unbalanced the exposure of your lower body training, and you're doing all extremely knee dominant and quad dominant stuff. Not that any of that stuff is bad. Those are like, and I'm very careful because I don't want to now discourage this guy who just got interested in training. So I'm, validating saying those are awesome movements. Pistol squats are hard. Like, I'm glad you have that plan. As you can imagine, there's a lot of muscles in the legs, and we need to like distribute the load that's going to them. He had never hinged in his life. He had never done anything for his glutes and his hamstrings, and
Mm.
his knees were so sensitive that like even just slightly bending them, they were on fire. So for him, like that was such a clear example of there isn't a diagnosis that I'm giving him, and there isn't something that I want to label that is wrong. And honestly, like there's really no testing that would give me a better answer than just having him describe what he was doing in the gym. From that information, I can tell you right then and there, his glutes and his hamstrings are probably weak. Hinge pattern is probably really hard for him to get into. Like all of that, I can get that information immediately. So he was a great candidate of like, all right, well, I'm going to give you all posterior chain stuff that feels awesome because you're not going to get bothered by your knees and you can keep getting a good training stimulus. Now let's find how we can start like that entry point for your knee discomfort. I think of that kind of in two ways as well. Like it's important because we want people to not lose motivation and not have the, as we all know with pain, the depression that comes with not being able to move and do what you want to do. But then also, like, if I only focus on the lower level stuff that his knees can currently tolerate, I'm not even
Mm.
getting a training stimulus in our session. So if I instead give him a deadlift and teach him how to do RDLs and conventional deadlifts and hamstring curls and leg curls and glute bridges, I can get a really good training stimulus that's physiologically going to move the needle a hell of a lot more than if we just do ISOs all day. So all of that stuff has a place, but for me, my bias always comes back to like, I want to make sure I'm giving somebody a training stimulus because I know that more muscle mass and like the feel good stuff that comes from being able to train and not being told that you can't do stuff because of pain is going to matter a lot more than day one, just zooming in only on the tissue that bothers them.
Yeah, fantastic. And I assume that the empowerment that comes with even something that seems totally unrelated, like a bicep curl, especially for a young dude, is probably like,
We're
hell
doing arm
yeah.
farm. Yeah, we're doing
Yeah.
arm farm. Like we say it jokingly, but it's so true. Like
Yeah.
and now the cool thing is having clients and patients who understand that that's how we do things. So I have a guy right now who he came to me years ago with, that the horrible stories we hear of people with back pain all the time. One of the fittest, most active people I've ever met has done like cross country paddleboard events and like surfs and he's like a badass. Hurt his back, was told to never do anything again, obviously. He's in his late 30s, he's still very, very fit. And we had gone through that process of building buy-in for years, honestly, of how to kind of navigate through this stuff. And now to the point where he's doing great. He inevitably is going to have a flare because he's a human and life happens and we all have flares. And he calls me and he says, I got a bad flare up. Can I come in and do a sick upper body workout with you? And I'm like, I don't think you realize how amazing of a question that is. Like, that's what I want every client to ask me. And I
Yeah.
got so excited because to me, like that means he got it. Like he has one rehab. Like that is exactly what I want because he knew, well, I know this isn't going to bother my back. I know it always feels good when I get movement in. And I know sometimes if I'm really flared, directly focusing on the area is just going to make me more aware and more pissed off. So let me do biceps. Let me be in a place where I feel safe and I have trust. And let me just do something fun that makes me feel good. Like that was so powerful.
Yeah, I'm getting secondhand excitement about
Right.
this. Yeah. Um, my worst bout of pain was maybe 5 or so years ago. It was like a left low back thing. I've told this story before, but just in brief, it was like a 6 to maybe 8 or 9 month period where it was just sitting was the most problematic. Lifting actually felt good. And I spent the majority of those months super, super focused on how can I fix the issue. And
Hmm.
eventually I actually just gave up. I was like, it's probably going to be like this forever. And then maybe 2 weeks after that point, the pain went away after I totally gave up on it and just started doing other things that didn't focus on the area, which was, I don't know what you make of that, but something I wanted to connect with this conversation is just during that time period. I would notice that there were certain periods during the day where I had less to do. And so I was more able to direct attention to the specific area. But then I would have like a conversation with a friend or I would have a conversation with my wife and I would be laughing or something. And that I would like wake up to the fact that like, oh, this I didn't have pain while I was talking to that person. What's going on there? And I know you talk a lot about how important the sort of emotional side of the lifting experiences from just who are the people around you? What are they like? What are they doing? Can you kind of just touch on the importance of that and how you've kind of tried to manufacture an environment that allows people to sort of get out of their head a little bit more? And if so, what are maybe some strategies that people who aren't in that like awesome environment can do for themselves to kind of mimic that?
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, I think that's such a good example of when we hyperfixate on something, all it's doing is increasing awareness to our nervous system and our brain. It's kind of like when people come in and maybe think that they want me to like poke and prod at the area. And I always just tell people, like, first of all, I haven't done manual therapy since PT school. So if you want somebody to do it good, go somewhere else because like that's not what I'm good at. That's fine if you want that, but like that is not what you want me to do. And then secondly, like, yeah, it's like when you have a bruise and you just keep poking it. Like all it's doing is increasing your sensitivity to the area and increasing your brain's awareness of that area. So often, like indirectly, just doing other things is so helpful. But yeah, when it comes to environment, I mean, I know it can be really cliche, and I think it's something that maybe years ago I would have also said was kind of cliche, but now I don't care. It's just true. Like just being positive and trying to have fun. I know it sounds so silly, but like we purposefully at Old Bull, like we are all so weird and silly and fun. And we do that for many reasons. Like we want to lessen this stigma that we are these know-it-all people and that like you're coming to gurus and like that you it's this like super sterile over medicalized environment. Like we want to completely get rid of that. Like we're all just silly, we have a lot of fun, we don't take ourselves too seriously, and part of that is just who we are as humans, but then part of that I think there is a little bit of the intentionality of knowing that if the environment that somebody is in pain and is coming to is a little bit more relaxed and nobody's taking themselves so seriously, it starts to also decrease this idea that pain is, in fact, this medical emergency or this
Hmm.
extreme danger or threat. If I'm doing an assessment with somebody and I'm asking them to move around and they're asking me, like, is this right? How do I do this? And I'm like, I don't know, let's see what happens. If I'm a little bit more relaxed, it's going to in turn make them a bit more relaxed. And I'm not saying this to say that we're just like, we don't care and we're just like laissez faire with everything. It's this kind of intentional vagueness where I want people to explore on their own. You mentioned it initially too, like exploring is part of it. If I tell you exactly what you do, what you need to do, that takes away the neurological side of everything and the cognitive development side of everything because your brain doesn't have to try and you're just
Hmm.
getting a list of instructions. So that's a big part of it too. If you maybe don't have that environment, or maybe it's something that you're struggling with a little bit more personally as a lifter too, I would say, like, for yourself, sit down and try to make a list of the things that you can do without discomfort. You'd be surprised pretty quickly what they are. Even if it's things with your lower body that are bothering you, and maybe you're pretty flared up and there isn't quite yet a lower body movement that you feel safe. We just joked about it, but it's true. Like biceps curls, not going to bother your back. So, like, I think even just using those strategies for yourself, and trying to find the things that you can do without discomfort, or at least with the lowest level of symptoms that you can, that's a really good starting place to just revitalize you a little bit and give you some of that positivity. And then I think also at the end of the day too, like if you let pain become such an isolating factor for you, and you completely disconnect from the world around you, this is easier said than done. We've all had injury and probably done this, but trying to keep some sense of normalcy of your social life and some sense of normalcy of just having fun in your day-to-day life is still very important too. Your example of laughing with your wife and not noticing it as much, that's like exactly what it's all about. Like if we ruminate, it obviously makes things worse. And if I, as a provider, every single time you come in, only focus on your pain, I'm just ruminating with you. So if I'm not focusing on the things that you can do and the things that we can have fun with, then I'm kind of missing the mark too.
Hmm. Yeah, I made a parallels to just negative emotional states earlier, and I'm reminded of that again here, where I'm not a therapist or a physical therapist. This is not medical advice. However, it does seem that like therapy culture, like talk therapy culture, has done a tremendous good for some people, and it has worked quite poorly for others who
Yeah.
maybe are paired with therapists who just force them sort of deeper into their own head all the time.
Oh yeah.
Which maybe you've seen that just because I would assume that this is somewhat tangential, but I would assume that people who have had bouts, long standing bouts of physical pain, likely have some kind of overlapping issues with the psychological pain, if not beforehand or during, then
Oh yeah.
potentially after. And that's a whole different difficult side of it. But that's kind of almost what you're, I think, addressing here at its root, which is just this concept of not forgetting about the fact that like the person in front of you is a person and not a machine.
Yeah.
And for me, I think that was, and this relates to the overall theme of like the fix it is like, you know, if a plumber shows up to your house and like the plumber knows how to fix the pipe, if they fix the pipe and they leave, and that was really difficult for me to get pulled away from.
Yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier was you said the word assessment, but you said the word assessment in quotations. Can you tell me why? Can you tell me why assessment in quotations?
Yes, absolutely. So I think this is another thing coming out of PT school that I initially thought that there was this kind of like laundry list of things that I was supposed to do with every single person, no matter what. Just kind of like this checklist of things that I would want to look at. And, as you kind of mentioned too, like got a clipboard, I got my pen, I'm in my coach's stance, kneeling, staring at you, and I'm saying, do this in facing me to the side from the back, and I'm looking really serious and really intense to kind of prove that what I'm doing is serious. And I feel like I've shied away from that quite a bit. I think there's value in learning that stuff initially, don't get me wrong, but I think now my assessment really is completely based on the human being in front of me. And I know that sounds like kind of a gimmicky thing too, but it really is the reality. I would say that my initial evaluation, the vast majority of it is a conversation because of the things that I alluded to earlier, where that first day, what I care the most about is that I create an environment where you feel safe to tell your story because I might be the first provider that you've ever been able to sit down and speak with for an hour. And
Mm,
that is invaluable. That initial building of that bond and me initially understanding who you are as a person and you understanding who I am as a person and seeing if we're compatible, if I don't get that and I just poke and prod at you, I think I've missed like the number one most important thing of starting like a therapeutic relationship.
mm,
I also make it very evident and manage expectations from the beginning. And I tell people how that's how I operate, that you might notice that today's a lot more of a conversation. And that's really important because of I want us to develop a relationship. I want you to make sure that you think this is the right fit. I want you to feel comfortable sharing the things that you've experienced. And I don't want to rush learning more about you and your background. I also use a lot of the information that you give me to form my decision making to kind of decide what I would deem appropriate for us to look at today. And if we don't get to it, it's okay because this matters more. So I'm very clear and I manage those expectations from the beginning because if somebody's not expecting that, they're like, why are we just here talking? And you'll see pretty quickly that people just share a lot. And you can kind of tell that it's like the first time that they've been able to. And I think that's really powerful. And I think that's something where, like, regardless of what setting you're in, I know not everybody has the luxury of spending an hour with somebody, but even if you're in a busier clinic and you're stacking some people, you still have more than they probably have ever had with their physician. And you can interweave those conversations, and you might not get all of it day one, but I think if you keep communication and learning about the person as like your main goal, that helps a lot. And then when it comes to the actual, like if I want to see strength stuff or movement stuff or range of motion stuff, I really am in real time based on what they're telling me, kind of deciding what I want to do that day. Um, for me too, at the end of the day, as I mentioned earlier, like the other two things that I care the most about is finding what you can do without symptoms and finding what we could start doing for your symptomatic movement. So that's going to be what drives my assessment that day too. It might even be as simple as, well, you told me these positions bother you in training. I'm going to kind of assume that these positions should feel good. Let's try a few of them to make sure. And then I'm going to send you on your way to be able to keep working on that stuff so we can zoom in on other things. I'm not really doing a very specific, joint by joint range of motion, mobility, strength assessment in the way that maybe typically people would think of in school. It's again, it's very like living and breathing and collaborative with the human at that time. A lot of it too, by just watching somebody move in a really non-threatening way, I get a lot more information than a very structured strength test. Because as soon
Mm,
as I tell somebody that I'm just testing them on this thing, they're in their head a lot and they might not maybe move as naturally as they normally would, or they might associate a finding with that as like, see, I suck. I knew something was wrong with me. So it's very exploratory. It's very, very open-minded. And it's a lot to just see like, how does this person exist in space? What are their strategies or patterns of preference? Something I like to do for like people with lower body discomfort, just as like a tangible example, without any further coaching, if I'm just trying to learn maybe like what this person is naturally kind of good at, what this person maybe has more struggles with, I'll ask them to get into like a split squat ISO hold and make them do it for about a minute. It's disgusting. And see what their body does. I'm not coaching them at all. If there's somebody who's a bit stronger with their quads, they're probably going to stay really, really upright and their quads are going to take the brunt of the work because that's their pattern of comfort. If there's somebody like me where their glutes and their hamstrings want to do absolutely everything, as soon as I get in that movement and it starts to get hard, it's going to be the hingiest split squat you've ever seen. And neither of these are wrong or incorrect or pathological, but it gives me so much information immediately of like, oh, I kind of know what your strategy is when shit gets hard. And that's what matters for pain and injury, right? Like how
mm.
can I keep your strategy when shit gets hard really, really, really robust and not lose that? But then how do I also maybe start to elevate your other strategy and give you more options? So if you are in a situation that's challenging, you have something else to help you, but you still have your strong foundation. So things like that, where I'm looking more again for patterns, and I'm not looking for a concrete answer. It's more exploratory for sure.
Hell yeah, that's awesome. Um, so I want to ask you I want to ask you a question, Katie, that I've been thinking about for a while. Okay.
Okay.
Because in me and my own journey, I've kind of described it so far. Right? It was the sort of fix it black and white thing. It was maybe too much of a hyper focus on biomechanics as it relates to pain thing. And now it's kind of like I'm still the guy who is primarily concerned with, targeting specific tissues, and oftentimes there's a correlation between people knowing how to set things up for a specific tissue and them not experiencing pain. But
Yes.
there are so many other things that
Yes.
are related to that. So I want to kind of like flip the script here and start to talk about when does this model of pain go wrong? So to be more specific, um, there's been the kind of movement of anti-fragile mentality.
Hmm.
No movements are bad.
Yeah.
I'm Alec Blennis and I'm Hercules and I can do a Jefferson curl and I can run a marathon and then I can, split squat 300 pounds. Most people are not Alec, okay? As
Yeah.
you and I are both familiar.
Yeah. I know I hired him as my coach and I'm like, all right, I'm
Yeah,
still
yeah.
trying to get to
Big
that. Yeah,
mistake.
yeah.
Big
Yeah.
mistake.
What have I
Um,
done?
the best mistake you've ever made.
Yeah.
Um, but I do sense in some people now almost an attachment. It's like a new form of attachment where
Yes.
it's like, I need to be able to do everything without pain
Hmm.
because pain is not bad. Pain is my
Hmm.
friend, actually, as we've discussed. Um, and so you end up in this interesting place where before the attachment was to say something like a specific mobility metric, range of motion, the fix it thing. But now we're past that. But now we have this kind of new attachment where nothing can ever be bad and I can do anything because no movements are
Hmm.
bad. So there's
Hmm.
obviously a partial truth there, but I think you kind of get what I'm trying to tease out here. It's like when do we start to go too far? Where is that point in your experience? And how do we kind of manage that side of things if we're sort of
Yeah.
over this hump, so to speak?
I think that's such a good question. And again, in agreement, because I've seen this kind of pendulum shift as well or swing as well. Yeah, I think like if we look at the two ends of the spectrum of just like it's all biomechanics or then nothing matters. And those are two extremes. Like I think especially for your population, bodybuilding, biomechanics matters a hell of a lot more because you have to manipulate positions to be able to get target tissue in a way that you just have such a different demand of like what you're clients' bodies has to do. And that's where target tissue matters so, so much more. And then even for me, like if I'm working with somebody who is maybe experiencing low back discomfort in a deadlift, and I don't want to just tell them like, it doesn't matter because your form doesn't matter. It's all fine. Karen in accounting, who's never deadlifted before, probably doesn't need to do like a pure spinal flexion version of a deadlift. She's probably going to feel a little bit more comfortable with a position with the dreaded, oh my gosh, am I allowed to say this? Neutral spine that's
Yeah.
targeting her glutes and her hamstrings more because if she feels her back, she thinks her discs are exploding. And her back also hasn't been gradually stressed in that way. So it could actually not be the best movement for her. So this is where like that nuance comes in of form matters all of the time versus bucket, send it, bend over like a shrimp and pick something off the ground. It just really depends on so many things and so many contextual background things of like the person you're working with. So I think, yeah, I do think there has been a little bit of an overcorrection to just like nothing matters, form doesn't matter, or even like negatively in the rehab space, like people just regress toward the mean. Nothing matters anyway. Nothing that we do really matters. I hate that extreme side of it too. Just like I hate the side that says your form is the only thing that matters and it's 100% the reason that you have pain. I think being able to understand that this stuff exists on a spectrum is the only way. Like, I think it's obvious and it's something that is, but it's difficult because as humans, we like to be in groups and we like to have a very clear answer for something instead of nuance. It's uncomfortable to be in the gray area. It's uncomfortable to say sometimes form matters, sometimes it doesn't. We want to have that like quick punchline that we can also say on social media. And I think that is challenging too, because you can't get into the nuance nearly as much about it. I think the argument of like, form not mattering as much. Again, if we consider who the individual is, for somebody like Alec, who has trained his body really aggressively in like every range of motion, imaginable and unimaginable, because the stuff that you see him do, you're like, I didn't even know that was a thing. And then I see it in my program on Monday and I'm like, I know what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah.
But you have people who have done that and they've actually gradually exposed their tissues to these movements. That's very, very different from somebody who has not, who has only deadlifted with a neutral spine their entire lives. And to prove a point that form doesn't matter, they want to deadlift their exact same weight with extreme flexion. It's not that the flexion was bad, it's just that their tissues literally had not been loaded in that way before, and they probably weren't ready for it. So that's where that conversation of like, how do we understand when form matters and when it doesn't, when biomechanics matters and when it doesn't? It's not a yes or a no thing by any means. I think that it's just become very popular to go so far in that direction. I think it's important to just like sit with yourself for a moment and ask truly what your training goals are and what matters to you. Because there's some crazy shit that I see online that I'm like, that's interesting, but it kind of goes exactly against what my current training goal is. Or, man, if I tweak something because of that, am I going to be pissed because now I can't do the training I want to do?
Mm.
And not that we want people to live in fear of those things, but that's an honest conversation to have with yourself. Like, somebody just sent me the other day to it's like a 10,000 kettlebell swing challenge in a week or something. And I was like, ew, that sounds terrible. And also to me, for me personally, all of the crazy things that I want to do. I want to be able to like reverse lunge, double my body weight, and then also be able to run up a mountain. Like those are my conflicting goals that I want to be able to do. If I do some like thing like this to just prove that you can do these things and I tweak something, I'm going to be really mad because I can't do what I want to do. So I think just like having that honest conversation, if it's you yourself kind of questioning what you want to do movement wise or talking to a client, like this is all communicative and collaborative and based on a conversation, and like not every single person fits into the box of sending it all of the time. And that's okay, like we don't all train that way.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that, with someone like Alec in particular, I think the kind of person who is keeping up with his content, and really admires, his insights on training philosophy and just the practical recommendations and all of that. It can kind of be this like attempt. attempt to mimic without understanding the context of what preceded his current philosophy. It's like he went through all the stages, he's went through all the timeline to sort of get to where he is, and so trying to
Yeah.
maybe jump into a position that he's in currently is probably a bad idea. And you can realize that very quickly with something like running, you know,
Yeah.
very obvious, very quickly. But with lifting, it's kind of like you can always make these adjustments to make it work for you. So I do think there's so much to take away from what you just said. Um, one other thing I wanted to touch on that's kind of related to this, kind of not, um, is this concept of bulletproofing because
Mm.
I mean it's kind of similar to the fixing stuff with maybe a slight degree of difference, but I do still see lots of content about, do this exercise. This is a bulletproofing exercise. And I would kind of like to hear your explanation of why the bulletproofing mentality falls short insofar as like how injuries actually occur.
Hmm.
And just to kind of like unwind that model of understanding, because I think the common understanding is if I arrive at a certain point in the future where I've gotten stronger, right? They're listening to all the positive things you're saying. I'm getting stronger. I'm getting bigger. I'm getting more fit. I'm meeting my fitness goals. Um, and yet maybe at some point in the future I get hurt. Like, how is this possible? I bulletproofed. I got stronger. I did everything
Yeah.
Katie said. I didn't hyper focus on any individual variable. And so I thought I was at this place of like really solid standing in my training. How is it possible that someone at that point could still not be bulletproof? They've built their suit of armor.
Yeah.
How is it that it's falling apart?
Oh, that's such a good question. I can use a personal example for this
Yeah, do
actually
it.
too.
Hell yeah.
So college rower, very common injury is disc herniation. Um, there's a lot of evidence on it being mechanically related to just sitting and flexing and extending your spine over and over and over again with a lot of load. So that could be a component. However, a lot more of it has to do with the grueling hours that you practice, how early you are up. Every single day, just how long you're on the water. If it's in college, like it was for me, I was still a student and studying really hard. I was a neuroscience major, so really busy all of the time. We had practice. I had to be up at 4 a.m., but good luck getting a college student to get in bed before midnight when they're finally on their own, like with their friends. The one day a week that we could go out, which was a Saturday, we went hard and just like binge drank. I
Great.
was in a lightweight program, so I had a weight limit. So I was for sure under eating. I just spoke with somebody about this the other day. Like I was the poster child of REDS or low energy availability, lost my menstrual cycle, like all of that stuff. And of course, disc herniation, back pain. Um, can I completely blame it on just the mechanical action of rowing? No, I had done it for 8 years. I was extremely strong. I could do all of the things in rehab that they asked me to because I was strong enough, but I still had pain. And that was such like a moment that I don't even think I realized in real time would probably lead me to where I am now. But it was just this like I couldn't understand. Like they would ask me to do all of these movements in rehab and all of these exercises, and I could achieve every single one of them. It just hurt. It was just really painful. So it wasn't a question of like me being strong enough. It was so much more of what are all these underlying factors that first maybe were the perfect storm of events to get me to where I am. And it wasn't that I just wasn't strong enough. I see this all the time too, because I work with a ton of power lifters and a ton of really, really advanced lifters, and they come in for pain. And like me telling a power lifter that his glutes aren't strong enough is a joke when I have a guy who deadlifts 700 pounds. Like it's
Mhm.
not that. So there's so much more to it. And me saying that is just a ridiculous take. So with all of that being said, I think it just shows us that like we can't no matter how prepared we think that we are, like pain is going to do what pain is going to do. We can hedge our bets a little bit better if we are better prepared. But I think just knowing that the inevitability of the human condition is that we will experience pain. And again, that's not in a nihilist way. It's more of an appreciation and understanding way of like maybe hoping that these experiences won't come as such a surprise or wreck your worldview or make you spiral because it's just part of it. Howard Lux is an orthopedic surgeon who I love. If anybody doesn't follow him, I highly recommend it. He has like one of my favorite quotes of all time where it says that we should not fear the consequences of injury, or we should not fear the consequences of exercise as a potential injury. We should fear the consequences of not exercising exponentially more. And I think that's so powerful. Like
Mhm.
any tweak or injury you could get from being active is a hell of a lot better than heart disease and diabetes and metabolic syndrome. And I think that's like an extremely zoomed out way of looking at it, but really, really important because I want to keep lifting and running the rest of my life because my life depends on it. If I get hiccups along the way, that's still better than big long-term problems of not being fit and not being active and not being healthy. So it's kind of a tangent, but I'm passionate about it, so I had to go there. But in terms of just like the bulletproofing side of things, like the context that goes into understanding why somebody has pain, and it's just so far beyond what a five bullet pointed list of exercises could ever give somebody. On the one hand, I will say that I think it's slightly positive because at least people are getting the message that movement can be part of the answer. So I like it for that reason.
Mm.
Like we are getting a little bit better at maybe shying away from thinking that rest immediately is the answer. If there's an exercise to fix me, then I don't have to rest. So while it's an incomplete part of the story, I think that is still like a net positive at the end of the day that we're getting that type of content in front of us. However, I think it continues to kind of add to the difficulty of helping people understand how not all pain equals harm, and everything isn't a logic scenario of if I did this movement, then I have this pain, or if I do this movement, then I don't have this pain. Um, I like to think of what, like when I'm talking with people, because people will come in like, well, what are the best things to do for my back pain? And that's where I kind of bring it all back again of like, well, I want to find all the things that you can do really well that feel good and keep you really strong there and keep you feeling like a badass. I want to find the things that currently don't feel as good and find like an entry point that we all feel comfortable with. And then I want to find ways for you to make sure that your fitness is maintained across the board in some way. So we're going to find an aerobic activity you can tolerate. We're going to find something for fun, like leisure that you can tolerate, the things that matter the most there, rather than being really focused on a very specific movement. And I want to fix, or I want to create the movements that you enjoy and that feel like they're contributing to your success, rather than maybe just what like this really generic list that says we'll fix you, we'll give you.
Hmm. Yeah, you're referring to this idea of trade-offs, which I really like. What is essentially the cost of not exercising, versus exercising and potentially incurring some kind of a pain or injury. I think it's a really good way to look at it. And I think that's a really helpful thing to think about with any of these concepts. You even referred to one in relation to bulletproofing. It's like, well, bulletproofing, assuming that mentality has different upsides and also different downsides. And I think that that is something that is maybe difficult for people to realize in domains that they're not super familiar with from like an education standpoint. So there are many things I feel like in the information space that I am not at all familiar with. And when I hear someone say something that would be super obvious to me if I knew the underlying
Hmm.
information, I'm quickly drawn into it because my brain isn't sort of operating in the same mode as it would in an exercise context. So always thinking about specific claims in terms of trade-offs I have personally found is much more helpful. Much like in the way that we don't demonize pain, we can look at it for what it is and for what it does well for us and not so good stuff. So
Yeah.
um, that covered a lot of territory. I was very happy to have covered. I want to kind of lead toward our end of discussion with a few like quicker, sort of more like, oh, this is a fun question. Let's see what Katie says type of thing. And so the first one I want to ask you about, you mentioned on the Coach 'em Up podcast. Shout out to Tim if you're listening. Tim, I was telling Katie before this that I do want to get down to Austin because I think it'll be fun. I'm a little scared,
Yes.
but I'm excited. Um, on Tim's podcast, he asked you what you would like to see different
Hmm.
in the industry, and you mentioned that you would like to see less negativity. And I was in my head thinking, I wonder what other things came up into her head that she did not say. So here I
Yeah.
am asking that same question because just I really appreciate sort of the way that you communicate super clearly and in a nuanced way, but in a way that is super accessible as well. So
Mm.
I admire that in you. And so I'm curious about this type of thing, which is like what other things are front of mind for you when it comes to social media specifically, just because everyone is obviously in a different physical environment.
Hmm. Yeah, well, thank you. That's a very wonderful compliment. That's always my goal is to make stuff easy to digest and hear. Yeah, I think I'm realizing like one of my biggest pet peeves in life is negativity, because I find it to be so exhausting, and
Mm,
I find it to be a way to go through life that just makes it exponentially harder than it has to be. And it's not to say that everybody's situation affords the ability to be positive all of the time. Of course, I'm not all of the time either, but I think if a really general lens of trying to look for the good in situations can serve us really well. Again, as cheesy as that might sound, but when it comes to like the negativity that bothers me the most in this industry, I think it's I think it's this weird way of talking poorly about other providers to kind of get your own clout or get your own audience or show that you know something that other people don't know. I think it's
mm,
really destructive, and I think it takes away from, first of all, I think it makes it a more hostile environment for people to feel like they are safe to learn and grow. Like we just gave examples of things that we did, honestly, before social media in this industry was really big, that we would have gotten blasted for now. And I think like that's one hell of a way to make somebody so like discouraged about their industry. And it's
yeah.
one hell of a way to make people feel like they don't belong or that they're not good enough. And I think when you have people who literally just want to help people, like tearing them down constantly isn't the best approach. Of course, there's some Wild West shit out there that people do that's just crazy or dangerous or unsafe. That stuff, I like, that's kind of one thing. But I do feel that, like, if you just disagree with somebody and you want to completely create an entire post talking shit about them and being like extremely negative to the point that like they're getting like death threats in their DMs, like stories that you hear that are legitimate. I don't think that's constructive for our industry. I think it doesn't help, especially if we're trying to like make people feel comfortable when they're in pain, or if we're trying to make people find a safe way to exercise. I don't think being that negative around our conversations as professionals is helping that at all.
Mhm.
So that's like a big gripe I have in the industry. And trust me, I'm all for poking fun and being silly, and I make fun of myself constantly, having disagreements, commenting something to kind of get more information. I'm all for that, but I think there's a really constructive way to do it instead of just being an asshole.
Mhm. Agreed. Yeah, I have found that the landscape has changed quite a bit since I started social media to where um I don't know. I feel like everyone who's like a content creator kind of has like their content creator phases. And what I have found is that the less I have felt I have understood, the more confident and aggressive that I was. And the more that I
Hmm.
understand, the less aggressive and more um, patient or just much more careful I have at least tried to be. It's a difficult balance to strike when so much of what allows people to find you in the first place is anything that is entertaining.
Yeah. Yeah.
And trying to fix certain issues in the industry for me, my approach has tried to be, at least in the last couple years when I felt like I've done it in a more mature way, it's been to try to model what I think is a healthy way to point out disagreement
Yes.
and respond to certain things rather than just trying to avoid it entirely. Um, I get most of it I don't see, but I get a lot of hate from a lot of people who obviously have no idea who I am. So I
Yeah.
just try to remember that I don't want to have other people, especially people in my audience. Like I hope that I have made it clear to people that um, this is not like a real life thing that people do. When you have conversations with people in real life, it just never ends up in remotely the same way that it ever ends up
Yeah.
online. And I've had a few of those moments where certain people were hyper aggressive with me until they got on a Zoom call. And I just feel like if there's beef, the beef needs to be settled with a Zoom call. So, you and I, Katie,
Yeah.
have no beef, but if at some point we have beef, we're going to need to hop on to have another chat here to settle that beef.
I
Um,
think that's such a good way of putting it. Like, you're gonna say a hell of a lot more than you would ever say and say it differently behind a screen than you would ever if you had to look somebody and communicate with them. And I think that's huge.
mhm.
Yeah, completely agree. I think we've all gone through our evolutions of like how we want to be perceived on social media or the type of content that we want to use to kind of get our exposure and get out there. I think if you think less of having to create content and more of just, and that was in quotations for people who are listening, and then more of just like sending out a message that you care about, I think that clears it up pretty quickly. Like, I've never felt less inspired than sitting down and being like, what's a catchy quote I have to say to today? Like, I've never felt less creative than doing
Yeah.
that. So anything I post is just like a stream of consciousness thought that I'm having. And
Mhm.
it's really just, or like based on a conversation I had with a patient who, that like stimulated an idea that I had that I wanted to get out. And I think if we remove that pressure of having to be a content creator, that we're going to naturally start to like just express ourselves a little bit more how we would want to instead of feel like we have to churn, 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 because that's where you get desperate and you start saying crazy things or it just feels forced.
Yeah. And it's all super new. I mean, everything in the evidence-based fitness space is new, but everything
Hmm.
up to the present moment in relation to like more and more people are getting into fitness because they want to create content rather than
Yeah, yeah,
because they like fitness. And then, man, I
yeah.
really do not envy anyone who is in this like, 10 to like 16-year-old age range who's on the fitness like train. Man, that would be a nightmare.
I know.
Because
I
even
talk
no, you go ahead.
I was just gonna say I talk about that a lot of like I got introduced to lifting very fortunately at age 14 because my high school rowing coach was awesome and competed at one of the best men's programs and came back and knew that we should be lifting. And
Hmm.
that was my exposure to lifting. It wasn't like getting my own gym membership and going or seeing people exercising and thinking I have to do that to look a certain way. It was just like strength training for my sport. And to not have all of that outside noise, like I just got to fall in love with lifting pretty naturally and enjoy it, and it was fun, and we were in like, like this shitty rusty high school weight gym or weight room, and like nobody was posting videos or taking pictures, or it was just such a more like natural way of learning about it. So again, it's like it's pros and cons. More people are exposed to lifting and exercise than have ever been before, and that's an incredible thing. But it comes with the drawbacks of we look at it in a very different way, and young people are exposed to it in a very different way, and the relationships with it and could be quite different because of that.
Hmm. Yeah, and she brings it back to the trade-off concept. I absolutely love it. So Katie, final thing. I know you have some traveling stuff upcoming. Is that correct? You have some seminars. So coaches,
Yes.
therapists, anyone who's interested in that, can you give me some details on that? I think you're coming to New York, if I'm not
I
mistaken.
am, yes. So training as healthcare is a weekend like workshop seminar that I do, and I have a part one and part two. Overall premise of it is helping, regardless of what your scope is, whether you're a physical therapist, a chiropractor, an athletic trainer, a coach, like strength and conditioning coach, everybody in fitness, everybody whose scope of practice is movement, is welcome and invited. And it's all about how do we understand exactly what we discussed today. Once we've ruled out red flags and trauma, how do we create that plan for somebody experiencing pain regardless of their diagnosis? Part one is lower body focused, part two is upper body focused. I'll be doing part two in Newport Beach in California, September 20th and 21st that weekend. Then I'll be in New York City October 18th and 19th for part one, January 24th and 25th for part two. So those are the big things coming up. I will also be with some of my favorite people that I have the pleasure of teaching with, Craig Liebenson and Ryan Chow of Reload PT in New York City,
Hmm.
Donald Mull, who is Kinetic Impact in San Diego, and then kind of like our special guest, Q Willie, if everybody is familiar with Coach Q online. We'll all be together at Exos in Phoenix in December for kind of
Ooh,
like a big several day teaching and movement. I'm super excited. It's one of my favorite events. So those are the things that we have coming up.
man, that's exciting. Can I
Yeah.
just ask, what is it that you like about teaching that is different from your everyday life working with clients?
Mm. Teaching, I think, was my number one thing that I used to always think that I wanted to do. I was on track for like a neuroscience PhD route, and I kind of assumed that I was going to be in the research and academic world. I'm very fortunate. I teach undergraduate neuroscience now, so I get to kind of scratch that itch of academia, and then have the pleasure of also obviously seeing clients. There's something about teaching, and especially now teaching more other people in the field. It's so much fun and fulfilling in a completely different way. Like our mission statement at Old Bull is pretty much to change healthcare, and that's very much centered on how do I change healthcare for the person coming in, and then how do I change healthcare for my team of providers to make them not burn out. And then if we zoom out even further, if we really want to change healthcare, how do we have other people who get it and other people in the industry who are practicing in this very evidence-based way, very physiologically driven way, and like psychological and caring about the human way. So getting that with teaching, it's the best feeling in the world. I've gotten to meet so many people who I would normally not get to meet. Yeah, it's I think it's probably my favorite thing that I am really lucky to get to do.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, and for
Yeah.
those listening, you threw in the neuroscience thing. We didn't even talk about that, but yes, Katie has other skills as well. So for anyone
Wearing,
listening, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, wearing a couple hats, very tired. That's really the main thing, but
Yeah.
very tired.
Well, Katie, this has been fantastic. I would love to do it again sometime. Everyone, if you're interested in Katie's stuff, it will be in the link in this description. If anyone listening is still listening, you have follow-up questions that could be for a Katie part two, please, please, please. If Katie will accept my subsequent invite, that is, she's still probably deciding whether or not to, but
I'll get back to you in a couple business days,
okay,
let you know.
okay, okay. Yeah, it's Sunday now, so I'll wait. All right, Katie, thanks so much. This was
Thanks, Ben.
awesome, and I'll see you soon.
Yes, thank you.